Greetings and welcome to another reading of The Age of Wings and Steel. Today we'll be starting with chapter 21 and perhaps moving onward. Now, I must inform you that during this reading, I may have to stop it. I'm not sure if or if not this will happen. However, if it does happen, it is because I am picking up my sister. In any case, without further ado, why don't we get started? Chapter 21. The celebration in the equestrian camp carried on from morning throughout the evening, and showed no signs of slowing by dinner time. Winstreak wasn't sure where the instruments had come from, but several of the Winsterman soldiers had started playing a lively series of tunes they called a hoedown. The white-tailed troops gladly joined the party, and the camp was soon filled with dancing and singing like she hadn't seen in years. The Firewings were a bit more professional, but after Winstreak wryly allowed herself a few spins around the camp with a soldier from Westerman, their discipline cracked and they too joined in the fun. Above all else, the air seemed filled with hope. A force of a mere 4,000 ponies had just sent an army of 10,000 fleeing for the dunes. If such a thing was possible, then might Equestria's shattered provinces find peace with one another? It was an unspoken message of unity that pervaded the campsite. Soldiers packed up their belongings, ready to begin the march home in the following days. The wounded who could not walk were slowly shifted onto mobile pallets, preparing for the journey back to Whitetail, where they could convalesce in peace. The bridge was still guarded, however. The line remained strong, still reinforced every 20 minutes for a new group of spear ponies. The griffins on the other side showed no signs of aggression. They were still squatting the remnants of the Horde's camp, nearly a quarter of a mile away from the bridge. The infantry had made no move toward the line all day. Winstreak reclined at the edge of one of the dancing circles. She had her helmet off, tucked under one of her hooves. She sighed, contented. She looked west as the sun approached the horizon. They had perhaps 3 hours before the sun set on the last day of this very brief war. Soon she would be returning to Canterlot, where she could see her husband again, and then she could be flying north to bring Rye back. They no longer need the aid of the Nord ponies, after all, and she was determined to make sure he made it back in one piece. The weather had been beautiful all day, as if celebrating with the ponies. She suspected the weather-forged Pegasi of clearing out the clouds to let the sun shine through, but she hadn't been paying attention to in the initial celebration. But there was still one cloud lingering far to the south. She blinked, looking closer. No, she'd been mistaken, there was nothing. Winstreak yawned and replaced her helmet on her head. She hadn't gotten a very good night's sleep. She was starting to see things. Not wanting to sleep and risk another nightmare as hideous as the last, she decided to take a walk to clear her head. The guard captain wandered south along the riverbank. Her path wound her up to the bridge. Normally, celerity could be found here, making sure that the line was replaced 3 times an hour. But the Duchess had yet to emerge from her tent. Winstreak had given the order that she was not to be disturbed, leaving celerity to ruminations. Why am I not reading this correctly? Without the Duchess's presence, however, the bridge seemed oddly empty. Hello, Captain. Winstreak started in surprise, then rolled her eyes. I thought I told you not to do that, Bert. She turned to find not her lieutenant, but Weedy. Oh, sorry. My apologies, Captain. The young stallion inclined his head. The two fell silent. They looked out over the Griffin's small force for a while. The faint east wind blew up, catching Winstreak's tail. She sighed. Weedy glanced sideways, his apparent casualness betrayed by the tension in his stiff back. A bit for your thoughts, Captain? Oh, I'm happy that we've beamed the Griffins back, believe me. It's just... Her voice trailed off. It's your son, isn't it? Winstreak closed her eyes and hung her head, laughing sadly to herself. Oh, Bertrand, I thought you were more discreet than this. I'm the only one he's told, Captain. He felt the burden was too much for one pony to bear. Too much stress for him, being my secret keeper? He was referring to you. Ah, Winstreak took a deep breath. Yes, it's my son. He's gone off on some damn fool mission for the princess that's going to get him killed, more likely than not. And after the events of today, it turns out that mission is completely pointless. I'm just... Her voice caught. She sniffed, her eyes watering. Weedy found something very interesting to look at in the other direction while she dried her eyes. She continued, her voice back under control. I'm just worried that he's going to get hurt. A mother's foolish fears, I suppose. I don't think you're being foolish, Captain. Thank you, Weedy. She smiled at him. A brief flash caught her eye. Did you see that? Yes, from the south. The two looked out again. Winston rubbed her eyes. I suppose I wasn't seeing things. That's shaping up to be quite the storm. Far in the distance, a massive black cloud was just barely visible. Good. I hope it rains all over Shrikefeather's army. She had a brief vision of black nimbuses and crimson rain. She shuddered, turning her thoughts away. Well, Captain, if you're planning to head after your son wants to return to Canterlot, and the princess allows it, I'd like to come with you, Bertrand as well. I don't need... maybe not, but you'll make us feel better if you take us along. You two aren't going to stop pestering me about this, are you? Weedy grinned. You're beginning to grasp the concept of nagging, I see. Fine, if the princess gives the go-ahead, I'll take you two with me. I'm not sure why you care, Weedy. You're my captain and shield sister. I'm not going to let you face something like this alone. Yay, the companions. Well, thank you. And give Bertrand my thanks as well. Of course, Captain. The two stood, looking at the sky, each busy with their own thoughts. The sun sank lower in the sky, streaking it with violet and rose. Behind them, the party continued unabated. The faint strains of music carried over the wind. Captain? Yes, Weedy? That storm is moving awfully fast. They tend to do that on the plains. They can swoop up on you in a minute. They both stared southward at the cloud. Winston felt a sinking sensation in the pit of her stomach. Weedy squinted. It's moving toward us. Yes. Those aren't flashes of lightning. They look metallic. Yes. Captain? Yes, Weedy? That's not a storm, is it? It wasn't a question. Winston took a fortifying breath and exhaled, shaking herself to make sure her armor was still secured. Tell me, Weedy, have you ever heard the story of George? The alarm was nearly drowned out by the sounds of the celebrating soldiers. At first, it could almost be mistaken for another instrument joining the music. But soon, the ringing alarm's distinct sound began to pierce through the din of the ears of the soldiers. There was a lull in the songs as the soldiers paused, listening to the frantic ding-ding-ding of the bell. They dropped their instruments, stamped out their fires, and left their food abandoned on the ground. Those who had removed their armor to allow freer movement for dancing hastily rebuckled it. Soldiers grabbed their weapons, racing for the bridge. Wings beat. Hoofs stamped, spears and shields fell into line, but the defense was disorganized, sloppy, distracted. The flap to Solari's tent burst inward. Winston's face was filled with urgency. Duchess! Solari took one look at the captain and her face hardened in instant understanding. Shrikefeather. She stood, shoving away the table. She walked to the side of her tent, brushing aside maps to reveal the small closet in which she stored her armor. Her face was filled with tranquil rage, a mask of controlled emotions. Her horn glowed and her armor slid out of the little chest. The silver chain links gleamed softly in the candlelight. Prepare your troops, Captain, she whispered. Winstreak saluted and vanished from the tent. Across the river, the Griffin infantry had begun their approach. The 700 remaining Griffins neared the bridge, a tight and cohesive unit of hardened killing machines. They were Shrikefeather's best, handpicked for the sole purpose of finally breaking the bridge line. To the south, the great cloud was now fully visible, and it was no cloud at all, but the most massive flight of Griffins any pony had ever seen. Not since the days of the Griffin Empire had such an army flown in the skies of Equestria. On the north side of the Grumar, Winston hovered beside Bertrand. The Pegasus from Weatherforge and the Firewings were all airborne, waiting for the enemy. They stared across the river. They have to be at least 1,500 of them. We'll hold it, Captain. We always do. Our troops are still disorganized and unprepared. This is going to get ugly, Bertrand. We'll hold it. Shrikefeather's got to have an ace up his sleeve. This is no ordinary attack. Bertrand said nothing in reply, his face unreadable beneath his helmet. Below, at the bridge, Celerity held command. Steady, every pony. Steady now. The Duchess's convoy soothed the soldiers. There aren't enough of them left to take the bridge. We can hold the line against 700 griffins. We will hold the line. Whitetail and Westerman ponies alike gritted their teeth, preparing for the oncoming assault. The cloud of wings and steel drew closer. Uncountable griffins swarmed in a vast seething mass. It was like a living thing, loomed up to reach out and consume the equestrians. It crossed the river, the sounds of 1,000 synchronous wing beats vibrating through the air. Never heard that word before. Winstreak felt like she was bracing herself for the impact of a wave. Her eyes narrowed. Get ready, every pony. The cloud burst. The griffins exploded outward, streaking into the ranks of the ponies. They were everywhere at once, completely blocking out the sky and the ground. Winstreak found herself immediately fighting for her life. 2 griffins swung toward her, claws outstretched. She kicked one in the face, somersaulting away to avoid the second's claw. A third raked his talons across her back, scratching the golden armor. There was a crack from behind her as Bergeron collided with the griffin. The second one grabbed onto him, pulling him away. Winstreak flew after it, driving her hooves into its skull and instantly breaking its neck. There was an immense roar, a thunder sound that shook through the air like an erupting volcano. All the ponies flinched for one brief moment, stunned still by the arrival of a new enemy. Hidden in the center of the cloud of griffins that they had flown from the south, remaining shielded from the ponies until it was too late. They burst from inside the horde, ready to destroy the equestrians. It was impossible. Winstreak had never really believed they existed. They were old legends, myths to children to entertain them and keep them from wandering outside at night. None of them had ventured from their homeland in centuries. The only pony she knew who had ever seen one was the princess herself, and they were a match for even her in power. They were great beasts formed from the bones of the world, creatures who had once strived against the gods themselves for dominion over the earth. They were inhabitants of the arid land of Wormgand, wielded a fiery breath and untold natural power. They were not living creatures so much as force of nature given flesh. Wherever they went, destruction followed, and nothing, no pony, no griffin, no god, could stand in their way, or so the legend said. Dragons. But there is one they fear. In their tongue he is Dovahking, dragon. Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. Their scales gleamed brilliantly in the sun's light, scintillating colors blinding and dazzling in their beauty. They were huge, their heads as large as houses. Their teeth were the size of a Pegasus' full wingspan and sharp as blades. Their talons could cut through the finest of Easthill steel with ease, for they were made of stronger stuff than iron. Dragons were the earth, more pure than any metal or stone. Trying to defeat one would be like trying to kill a mountain, but the most striking features were their eyes. The only word that could describe them, thought Winstreak, was old. They were windows into the ancient past, reminder that they were as older than Equestria itself. There were 2 of them. One was bright Viridian, her gleaming green hide scarred with the marks of old battles won and lost. The other, a dark scarlet with the shade of freshly spilled blood, even bigger and covered with more ancient wounds that told a foe defeated and an enemy slain. They descended upon the army of Pegasi like colliding meteors. The first victims, still stunned by the appearance of the legendary creatures, were felled in seconds at the dragon's huge claws slashed through their ranks. The griffins resumed their furious swarming, slicing apart the Pegasi. The Firewings were the first to respond to the new threat, flying fearlessly into battle as they always did. Winstreak and Bergeron flew high above the great red dragon, dodging griffins and Pegasi. "Do you see a weakness?" shouted Bergeron. Winstreak yelled back over the noise. "No, it's a dragon. It doesn't have any weaknesses." "Well, we have to do something. They're going to wipe out our entire army out." "Come on, go for the eyes." Together, they dived downward, flying straight for the dragon's head. From the opposite side, Weedy led a dozen others in the same maneuver. A third squadron, nearly 30 Firewings, dove from the front, drawing the dragon's attention. Its eyes narrowed. Right before the Firewings collided with its head, the dragon twisted violently, slamming its neck into first Weedy group and then Winstreak. It was like being smashed by a mountainside. Winstreak dropped, stunned and unable to flap her wings or focus her thoughts. The wind rushed past her, roaring. She regained control, spreading out her wings and trying to steer her descent while she recovered. She looked upward at the great red dragon, just in time to see the third squadron attack. The dragon's mouth yawned wide. Windstreak stared from below in awestruck wonder. The dragon inhaled, and from its mouth poured a massive font of flame. The fire was hotter than any Windstreak had ever felt, including the burning tent of the assault on the camp. Even from far below the dragon, she could feel the blasts of heat. The fire wings caught in the flame simply vanished, wiped from existence by the dragon's breath. The green was ravaging the Cloudsdale Pegasi, ripping apart their formations with impunity. All around, griffins swooped in between the dragons, picking off stragglers and fleeing Pegasi. Windstreak hung in midair, dismayed. "Captain!" Bertrand screamed over the roar of the battle as he rocketed down beside her. "Captain, what do we do?" "Stay alive. I need to get to the Duchess. We'll make a fighting retreat. Get the Weatherforged Pegasi mobilized." Windstreak rocketed away toward the bridge. Bertrand flapped helplessly for a moment, then turned around and flew back into the thick of it. Below, at the bridge, the griffins pushed forward. The maulers had finally struck, driving forward like a wedge from their shields. The other griffins had cleared a path to the front of the giant mace-wielding berserkers. The maces crashed against the shields, but the spear ponies held. Celerity screamed orders, trying desperately to maintain control of the situation. Above her, scores of ponies were burning to death every minute. Her forces were in complete disarray. If the bridge line broke, all was lost, but still it held. From inside the great wedge, a massive shape erupted. His wingspan was over 3 meters long. His head feathers were as black as soot, and his eyes pierced the armor of whomever they stared upon. He held no weapon, for his talons were more than enough. He wore no shield, for no foe could touch him in battle. His armor bore no insignia, nor any indications of rank, for he needed none. His authority was obvious and absolute. He said nothing, and gave no battle cry, for no words were necessary. General Shrikefeather had taken the field. The spear ponies shunted their spears upward as they had done so many times before. The general's beak opened and he let loose a piercing shriek. Ponies cringed and flung their hooves to their ears, terrified. The general brushed aside the spears with a contemptuous claw, falling among the spear ponies like a wind. Blood splattered through the air. The maulers charged in behind him, wreaking havoc with their maces. The ponies fell back, terrified and overwhelmed. The line was broken. Windstreak landed next to the Duchess, who was still shouting orders. "Celerity, the battle's lost. We have to retreat while we still can." "Never. He hasn't won this yet." "Celerity, even if we hold the bridge, those dragons are going to wipe out our entire army. We need to go." The Duchess looked back at Windstreak, her mane blowing crazily in the wind. "No. No retreat. We will not let those mongrels through. I will not allow it." Windstreak grabbed the Duchess and shook her, throwing protocol to the wind. "Celerity, be reasonable. We have to save as many of our troops as we can." The unicorn's horn pulsed brightly, and Windstreak found herself flung backwards onto the ground. Celerity stamped her hooves down aggressively, steam flushing from her nostrils. "Don't you dare, Captain Strudel. No pony under my command flees in the face of battle." Windstreak looked at Celerity's face. The Duchess's eyes were wide and wild. Her mane flew unkempt around her head. She stared at Windstreak, but Celerity wasn't really looking at her. Her gaze was lost in some other world. Windstreak had seen the same look before, one horrible day long ago, as a trapped stallion burned to death inside a flaming winery. His eyes had rolled as he turned feral in his final moments. Celerity's face was now identical. She had lost herself. There was nothing more to be said. Windstreak shook her head and took off, leaving the half-crazed unicorn standing alone and panting. Windstreak whirled back around, screaming, "Hold the line!" But the line was no longer hers to hold. General Shrikefeather and the rest of the griffins had driven the ponies back completely over the bridge. For the first time in 600 years, griffins stepped over the Trello Bridge and into the Duchy of Whitetail. Windstreak flew over the lines of Westerman and Whitetail ponies. "Retreat!" she called. "Retreat! Fall back to Whitetail City!" Seeing the golden armor, the ponies below heeded her command, and began to move away from the bridge. Above, Bertrand was doing his best to organize the Pegasi in the midst of their airborne slaughter. With agonizing slowness, the army began to shift northward. At the base of the bridge, Celerity retained control, A scant 100 unicorns and earth ponies still fought bitterly against the oncoming griffin horde. They battled like mad ponies, killing dozens of griffins for every one that they lost. The Duchess herself entered the fray, flinging spells into the griffins. General Shrikefeather found her at last. Celery was locked in combat with a group of griffins, along with several of her soldiers. Celery's horn glowed brightly, and with a snap hiss, lightning flew from its tip to strike a griffin in the chest. Another leapt to slash at her, but was intercepted by a soldier's spear. The white-tailed spear pony was grabbed by another griffin and dragged away. Celery sent another bolt of lightning flying into the griffin before her. It sizzled on his flesh, and he fell. Behind her, she felt a great thud, and the ground shook. She turned wildly, another spell flying to her horn. Shrikefeather had come for his prey. Before she could let her spell fly, his talons raked across her face. She cried out in pain, flinching. He grabbed her bright chainmail with bowed claws and swung the Duchess sideways. She flew through the air, crashing in a heap. Celerity planted a foot underneath herself. She raised her head, firing a bolt of lightning at the general. But the griffin was already airborne, and the bolt missed as he flew toward her again. He landed heavily beside the Duchess. She struggled to stand, but his claw slammed down on her head, driving it sideways into the dirt. "Look around you, Celerity." General Shrikefeather leaned his head down into the Duchess's. He held her down into the dirt. "Look at your army." Celerity's eyes swirled back and forth. She struggled, snorting and spitting in fury, trying to pull upright, but to no avail. The general held her down tightly. "Look." Celerity's motion slowed. Her eyes rolled back down, and she gasped for air. She looked out at the bridge. All around it lay the corpses of hundreds of ponies. Even now, innumerable griffins were pouring over into Whitetail. Above, the roars of the dragons and the smell of brimstone dominated her senses. She twisted her head to the north. Her army, what shattered remains of it were left, was fleeing. "They are running, Celerity. Running like cowards." Shrikefeather clamped harder on her head. "For too long, you have stood between me and Equestria. If not for your interference, I'd have taken the Southlands years ago." His voice was a curious mix of respect and anger. Celerity couldn't catch her breath. Her heart beat like a drum. Her eyes flicked helplessly. She continued her futile struggle. "But your time is done. Look, and see all that you wished for cast down and broken at your hooves. Here, at the end, you are nothing, Celerity." The Duchess looked out over the land of Equestria. In the distance, though she knew it was impossible, she fancied she saw the golden spires of Canterlot glittering in the sun. Tears blinded her. "I'm sorry." "Oh, Celerity, it's too late for that." "Celestia, I'm so sorry." The pressure on her head released. Duchess Celerity Augustine Bell looked up at the sky one last time, watching the two great dragons circle the battlefield. In the corner of her vision, Shrikefeather's talon raised high above her. She stared at the sun as the last few rays peeked over the horizon. She felt oddly at peace. And then, she felt nothing at all. And that was chapter 21! Now, before I continue, I would just like to give a special shout out to my friend Rena-chan, who is actually creating a convention in Los Angeles. It is going to be called Equestria LA, and you can find more about it on equestriala.com. Now, let's get on with the reading. Chapter 22. I need to rest. Cranberry slumped to the frost-covered ground, her chest heaving. Rye looked back at her and nodded wearily, his breath puffing out in a cloud. Inger sat down, and Rye followed suit with a grateful moan. Flakes of snow drifted gently down. The tundra was wide and empty, the only visible feature anywhere was the mountain range behind them. Though the three had been walking for hours, the Joders still loomed over them, their peaks lost in the clouds. Rye couldn't even see the sun through the thick weather, but the bright white snow was nearly blinding. Where they left the mountains, the ground had been mostly dirt, but the further north they plodded, the more the ground vanished under a thin blanket of ice. "Where are we, Cranberry?" Rai suppressed a shiver as a cold wind swept past them all, leeching the warmth from his skin. Few of their belongings had escaped the caves. Inger had been wearing his armor, and Rai still had the bags with the treaties, but their heavy cloaks and all of Cranberry's things were lost. Rai had not been carrying any supplies in his saddlebags. They had no food, no water. It would probably have frozen anyway, he reflected. His stomach growled. I'm not sure. The Earth Pony's face was haggard and dull. We've obviously passed into Sleipnord, but I have no idea where that passage led out. We could be 100 miles past to the west of the pass for all I know. Rai yawned. Inger's eye sharpened. If you're tired, perhaps we should sleep now, before we travel any further north. I'm fine, Inger. We need to be careful up here. Falling asleep in this weather can be the last thing you ever do. Inger focused his eyes on some distant memory. I've been to Sleipnord before, a long time ago. The princess set some of the Firewings to broker a trade agreement with the Thane of Aenir, I don't know. Cranberry, eager for a distraction from her rumbling belly, took the bait. What about? Steel shipments, if I remember correctly, but our flight got caught in a storm. We were forced down shortly after we passed over the Jurder Mountains. We landed in a pinewood forest. Cranberry whistled. Sounded like the eastern Ghostwood. How'd you end up there? That's a long way from Aenir. I don't know what it was called. I just remember how... wait a second. Well, I believe that's meaning I had to go. Hold on. Alright, I am back. Alright, so... where was I? Alright. I don't know what it was called. I just remember how cold. Inger blinked. You two are both from Canterlot, yes? They nodded. Remember the winter 4 years ago? Cranberry's face went very blank. Rai looked at her and cringed. Tentatively, he said, I was only 2 then, but I remember. Mother wouldn't let me leave the house for days. Said I'd catch my death. He glanced uncertainly over at Cranberry, who was still imitating a statue. Inger continued, missing the small exchange. Crops died, the castle's waterways froze up, the streets were buried with snow, we had to call in from help from Weatherford to get the weather under control, but... Cranberry, her voice oddly tight, said, but it was too late. Rai winced, no longer able to look her in the eye. He began pawing the ground awkwardly with a hoof. Many of the town's ponies didn't survive the winter. Dozens of little fillies were left without their parents. Her voice caught, but then she looked at Rai with a brief, grateful smile. Some were fortunate enough to have siblings and friends to look after them while they tried to scrape by. Her smile faded. Others weren't so lucky. It was horrible. Inger was still lost in time. But it was nothing compared to those nights we spent in that forest. Low temperature doesn't normally bother Pegasi. Our blood gives us some protection from it. That's how we can fly high enough to force the weather. But in Sleipnord, the greater danger isn't the wolves or the monsters or the unfriendly locals. It's the cold. Your breath freezes as you exhale. Tiny icicles form on your skin. Wings freezing over. The air in your lungs turning to ice. 3 of our company died after the first night. 2 more followed them the next. By the time we finally make the Aenir, only myself and 3 others remained. Outraged, Rai broke in, saying, The Pegasi up here must be insane. How can any pony survive in that kind of weather? There aren't any Pegasi in Sleipnord, said Cranberry suddenly. This is all runoff weather from Equestria. Rai was stunned. No Pegasi? How do they control the weather? Magic? No unicorns either. Every pony in Sleipnord is 100% Earth pony. Well, he said, discouraged. At least we're not going in the middle of winter. It's just barely starting to get chilly. It's still late fall down in Canterlot. The weather shouldn't be that bad. Inger grimaced. That mission took place 5 years ago, in June. They were all silent for a while after that. Cranberry shivered. Well, she said suddenly, standing. If we don't want history to repeat itself, we better get on our hoods and start moving. I lost all my maps back under the mountain, but I still remember the general lay of the land. I think the closest hall should be Saddlestead. We need to keep moving north. Without waiting for them to follow, she galloped off. Inger stared after the Earth Pony in surprise. What's gone into Miss Cranberry? His eyes widened as he finally caught on to the buried subtext of their earlier conversation. He cringed. Oh no. Don't tell me that she... Yes, said Rye, somber. I didn't realize. A lot of fillies lost their parents, Rye echoed. After that winter, she and her sister Potluck stayed with my family for a year, until Potluck managed to get a job working in the city library. He smiled sadly. That's when Cranberry started reading about the old civilizations. She'd bring books over for me to look at every now and then. Do you think I should apologize? Give her some time first. She doesn't like to talk about her parents much. Rye took after Cranberry. Inger followed, still berating himself under his breath. They marched endlessly through the frozen plains, leaving no hoof prints on the hard ground. The light snow left only a thin blanket, crunching under hoof as they walked. Gray skies looked down drearily on the three, letting no warmth through from the sun above. Icy wind would blow up intermittently, chilling to the bone. Rye discovered the moisture in the air had a tendency to freeze, pelting them with tiny shards of ice. The land seemed to stretch out endlessly around them, without any trees or hills to break the flatness. The mountains were still visible, but the weather behind them was beginning to thicken and obscure them from sight. They had left the foothills behind long ago and were now deep in the tundra. Cranberry pressed on ahead. I think we're getting closer now, she said through shattering teeth. Keep an eye out for big wooden structures. Inger's brow bent in concern. He quickened his pace to pull equal with Cranberry, extending a wing to shield her from the wind. Rye followed suit, though his little wing was a sad counterpart to Inger's. Cranberry looked gratefully at them both, but she kept shuddering. I think we need to stop soon, said Rye. It's getting dark. It can't be more than 6 o'clock, stammered Cranberry. Inger nodded. We're far north of Canterlot, he said, and we're on the cusp of winter. There won't be a lot of daylight to go around for the next few months up here. For every 24-hour day, we'll be lucky to get 5 hours of sunlight. She gave a violent shake. Well, we can't stop here. There's no protection from the wind. We're not going to find any before nightfall. We'll have to dig a pit. Inger looked at Rye. Keep moving around, Miss Cranberry. Try to stay warm. Rye and I can do the digging. Rye nodded. The two scraped their hooves across the frosty ground, scoring gashes in the ice. Luckily for them, it was still thin at this time of year, and the ice soon yielded its hard dirt. They worked for an hour and a half, excavating a small pit to shield them from the worst of the wind while they slept. The sunlight was long gone by the time they finished, but when they stepped back at last, they had dug a pit large and deep enough to fit all of them inside. The sweat from the exertion had frozen on Rye's brow. He quashed a shiver, grateful for his mother's gift of Pegasus blood. Even with his natural resistance to cold, he was still freezing to the bone. He can only imagine what it was like for Cranberry. The pink pony was shaking like a leaf by now. She fell gratefully into the small ditch, curling up to try to hold some warmth to herself. Inger and Rye slid down next to her on either side, by unspoken agreement. The three were wedged in tightly. Cranberry flinched at the touch of Inger's icy armor, but it soon warmed from the heat of the three bodies. The ponies lay motionless, except for her involuntary shudders. The wind howled around them like the shrieks of griffins thirsty for blood. The snow was falling harder now, beginning to cover them with a thin layer of white. Inger looked at Rye, his face as worried as Rye felt. Slowly, Cranberry's shivers calmed, and she finally began to snore softly. The two others breathed silent sighs of relief. Neither would be getting much sleep that night. As the hour passed, the wind began to die down. The snow fell quietly. Neither the song of birds nor the howl of wolves pierced the silent tundra air. At length, Inger broke the quiet. Rye? I felt I should thank you again. Inger's breath puffed out slowly. For saving our lives. Rye shook his head, smiling. Don't mention it. What do you really want, Inger? I confess, I have a question for you. Aha. Ask away. Riley looked down to make sure Cranberry was still sleeping soundly. Her chest rose and fell in steady rhythm. Remember 2 weeks ago, when all of this started? Of course. Had it really been just 2 weeks? That night in the forest, I was wondering, why were you there when you ran into the Prince's courier? Riley sighed. He looked ahead at the edge of their small shelter. I was hiding. From what? Myself, I suppose. Best to get it over quickly. The day before, I'd watched out of the Celestial Army's officer exams. I went out into the woods to be alone for a while, when I ran into Dawn. You know the rest. Inger looked surprised. Officer exams? Why were you trying to join the army? I'm not sure anymore. Riley looked up at the dark sky. I thought I wanted to be like my mother. I wanted to see her face light up with pride when I got those officer bars. I never really had a shot anyway. Why not? Inger looked genuinely curious. What, besides the obvious? Riley raised an eyebrow and gave his wings a flap, then sighed again. I don't think I'd be a very good soldier. You've proven you're sturdier than you look. It's not that. It's just, in the tales, being a warrior is all about defending the weak and protecting Equestria. They don't talk about the blood or the sweat or the fear. They barely mention the killing. I don't know if I would have the stomach to kill another pony when the cards were down. Ah. Inger's eyes were all too understanding. Yes. He looked off into the distance. It takes a certain detachment to kill and stay sane, especially if your enemy is a pony rather than a monster. It changes you after a while. Have you ever? Yes. They were quiet for a moment. If you didn't want to be a soldier, then why were you trying to join the army? Rice studied the dirt, drawing circles with his hoof. I just wanted to succeed. No, I wanted to be seen to succeed. I've been hidden in my parents' shadow for my whole life. I want to cast my own. So you want to be famous? Inger said, skeptical. Not famous. Rai lifted a wing, pointing at it. All my life, I've been called a cripple. I used to hate how unfair it was, but just complaining about it isn't going to change anything. He gritted his teeth. I need to prove them wrong. All of them. I need to show them that I can do great things, Pegacorn or not. Inger nodded slowly. I can understand that. He wrestled with himself for a moment, but honesty won out. I know what it's like to be looked down upon for your birth. My mother died when I was young. I never knew my father. Life isn't easy for a bastard on the streets, but I survived until the Firewings found and rescued me. Your mother, in fact. He looked over at Rai. I owe everything to her. Ha! Rai gave a black laugh. The cripple, the orphan, and the bastard. A fine group of heroes we are. We're not heroes, Rai. We're not fighting great battles or slaying giants. We're just trying to help our country the best way we can. My mother's a hero, said Rai wistfully. Yes, but wars are rarely won by heroes. Inger gave him a rare smile. That usually falls to the grunts like us. Do you think she's still alive? The fighting must have started by now. Don't worry about it, Rai. I've flown with your mother through more battles than I could count. I doubt even a dragon could kill one streak fireman. Oh gosh. Rai smiled nervously. I hope you're right. He closed his eyes and laid down his head. We'd better get some sleep and move on early tomorrow. We have to find this Saddlestead place soon. I don't think Cranberry will last another night. Inger looked down at the earth pony between them with concern. Her soft blonde mane was coated with tiny fragments of ice. We'll have to. We'll find it. We have to. In the morning, long before the sun rose, they roused Cranberry with great difficulty and continued their trek. The snow had stopped sometime during the night, but the wind was picking up the slack. It bit fiercely into their skin, and the little flecks of ice flew through the air like stinging bees. Cranberry was hardly talking at all now. She occasionally stopped to try to remember some detailed map before adjusting their path. Without Inger's head compass, they would have been completely lost, but they were slowly and steadily heading north. Inger, I think you should take a look at the area from the sky. See if you can spot Saddle's said. Cranberry shivered violently. The tips of her ears were turning white. Inger, alarmed, gave Rye a look and jerked his head at Cranberry, and took off into the air. Rye tried his best to shield Cranberry from the wind, but his little wings made a poor barrier. She sat down, head hunched against the cold, and stared dully upward at Inger, who was just a faint golden dot in the sky. A few minutes passed before he returned to the ground, shaking the ice out of his feathers. I saw something. It couldn't have been more than 2 miles north of here. Inger's face was lit with the first enthusiasm Rye had seen since leaving the caves. It looked like the sun reflecting off metal or something, or close. Cranberry stood, but lost her balance and fell to the ground. Before Rye or Inger could help her, she was once again climbing to her house, shivering. Let's go then. She plodded onward. The two stallions shot each other helpless glances and followed. The skies finally began to clear. The sun rose, but it seemed to be far southeast of its normal position. Everything about Sleep North seemed slightly off kilter. Rye felt like he was walking toward the roof of the world. Home seemed very far away in this alien landscape of ice and snow. They made slow progress. Cranberry's pace had grown more and more unsteady, and she was beginning to falter. She said no word of complaint, but her failing strength weighed heavily on all their minds. They pressed on, determined and desperate. The pain in Rye's stomach was almost as bad as the pain in his lungs, each breath like a knife in the cold air. It had been at least 3 days since any of them had eaten. Oh wow. Rye paused. Up ahead, he saw a bright flash of gold. Did you two see that? See what? Inger sounded half asleep, his voice sluggish. His hooves had started to drag through the frost. I saw something up ahead. Rye's heart beat faster. I think it was a pony. And hold on one moment. Alright, sorry, that was a notification from my fan about a video. Anyway. I think it was a pony. He galloped on ahead, ignoring Inger's noise of protest. Hey! He shouted. Hey, any pony there? Ahead, he saw a blue Pegasus clad in golden armor. He raced up to her, panting in the harsh cold. Mom, what are you doing here? He blinked and rubbed his eyes. His mother was gone. Rye stared blankly ahead. His stomach growled. When the others caught up to him, he rejoined them wordlessly. What was that about? Cranberry stammered. I thought I saw my mother. He shook his head to clear it. Inger looked grim, as usual. Rye was beginning to think that this was his default expression. That's a bad sign. Be careful, Rye. Don't go herring off like that again. You might end up chasing hallucinations to your death. What's that, up ahead? Rye. No, really, look. I see it too. Come on. Cranberry galloped ahead. Rye and Inger both followed, running as fast as they could manage. The three reached the top of the small hill to find a magnificent vista before them. They stood on the shore of a massive body of water. It had to be at least the size of Lake Elizur down in Equestria. Rye couldn't see the other shore. The sun shone down on the sparkling water, reflecting up off the ice floes and casting golden glows all around. It was heartbreakingly beautiful. Rye sank down to the ground in despair. We passed it. We must have passed it in the storm, or we came out farther west than we thought. He couldn't even summon the energy to swear. Inger just stared out over the water. Cranberry shivered violently. This is the Dragon Lake. We're too far north. We needed to turn around. They were going to die out here. He'd never get to help get the Princess Celeste she needed. Equestria was going to fall to the Griffins. No. They might not be great heroes, but the fate of their homeland rested on their weary shoulders. Rye stood again, determined. Come on. We're still going to Southstead. Cranberry, lead on. Earth Pony looked around, trying to get her bearings. I think it's this way. She started off south, back down the hill. They all marched alongside each other, Pegasus and Pegacorn sheltering Cranberry from the wind. The sun's pale light did little to warm them. They kept walking for hours. A sudden gust of wind whipped past, and Rye's ears perked up. Did you hear that? Inger groaned quietly. Rye, it's just another... Oh, I heard it too. Cranberry was in bad shape. Her normally bright pink coat was pale and covered in flakes of ice. Even Inger looked worn down. Rye felt his strength slipping away by the minute. They had to keep moving, or they would surely die. Let's go. Just one more hill. You said that 2 hills ago. They drudged through the snow. Faint sounds echoed in the air. There it was again. It sounded like a horn. He lifted his head, hopeful. Maybe there are ponies over this ridge. If it's not just another hallucination. They crested the hill. It was no hallucination. Before them lay hundreds of ponies, fully armed and armored. They were falling upon one another in battle, with blades and hoof maces and all manner of other weaponry. The sound of the battle flew up into the 3 on the wind, carrying with them the stench of blood. Inger looked out at the carnage. He exhaled slowly. Welcome to sleep, Nord. And... well, yeah, I'm not going to do any more music because I'm tired as it is. But in any case, that is the end of that, and I hope you enjoyed it. Have a good day.